gospel today comes from the Gospel of John, and there we read, Jesus prayed for his disciples, and then he said, I ask not only on behalf of these, but also on behalf of those who will believe in me through their word, that they may also be one. And you, as you, Father, are in me, and I am in you, may they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. The glory that you have given me, I have given them, so that they may be one as we are one. I am them, and you and me, that they may become completely one, so that the world may know that you have sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Father, I desire that those also whom you have given me may be with me where I am, to see my glory, which you have given me because you loved me before the foundation of the world. Righteous Father, the world does not know you, but I know you, and these know that you have sent me. I made your name known to them, and I will make it known, so that the love with which you have loved me may be in them, and I in them. Let us pray. Lord, may your words only be spoken and your words only heard. We do ask this all for your love's precious sake. Amen. Please be seated. We are in a sermon series now that we are simply calling Give Me Jesus. It is a very personal sermon series. It's one that has a lot of meaning to me personally, and I've more or less simply written these sermons to myself and hope that maybe they'll speak to somebody else as well. I've written them to myself because I feel like we're living in an age or a time where our culture is increasingly marked by frustration, discouragement, and despair. And I was starting to feel some of those things myself. And so I felt like I just really need what it is that Jesus has to offer, and I think perhaps you do too. And so last week we looked at Jesus' call to live by faith rather than by fear, a time when so many people are afraid of so many things, or letting fear dominate what they do and the ways they behave. And Jesus calls us to a very different type of life, a life of faith and not fear. We looked at the peace that Jesus promises us, the peace that comes not through numbing ourselves, taking the edge off, but getting the edge on, getting our edge on, moving towards our edge, feeling what it is that makes us uncomfortable, and then working to be part of a solution to that, rather than just continuing to be the problem. This week, we're going to look at Jesus' call to live by hope and not by hate. And again, I think we live in a time where increasingly our lives are characterized by the loss of hope, and then the loss of that hope by increasingly uncivil behavior, and in fact, sometimes even by a rise in hatred and seeing one another as haters. And it surprised me a little bit when I was doing some preparation for this sermon, and I was looking at the word hope. I was looking at synonyms for the word hope. And then I looked at some antonyms also, and in the midst of the antonyms, and an antonym is an opposite, a word that's an opposite of another word. When I was looking at some antonyms of hope, one of the antonyms to hope was hate. And that puzzled me a little bit because I thought, what does hope and hate have to do with each other? They seem like very different things, and I wouldn't have thought of one as the opposite of the other. But as I thought about that and puzzled about it a bit, it began to make more sense to me. And what I began to realize is that the only way we can hate somebody is if we give up on them, if we give up hope for them. And in a sense, if we give up hope on ourselves, hope that we might be able to forgive them, that we might be able to believe the best of this other person, that we might be able to call the best forth in that other person, and if we give up hope in a better world that comes when we're able to forgive this other person, we're able to continue believing this other person, perhaps this other person finds a way ahead, and together we bring our gifts, and together we make the world a better place to be. So the only way we can give ourselves over to hope is if we can give ourselves over to hate is if we stop hoping. If we stop hoping that God can work, that God can do, that God can redeem, that tomorrow can be better today, that a person can be better tomorrow than they can be today. And Jesus, in his prayer that he prays today, it's a prayer full of great hope. And that's striking because the story of the disciples could be a very different story. It could be told as a very different story than the story of hope. It could be told as the story of a group of people who are nothing so much as a great disappointment. The disciples were always getting it wrong. But that's not the story that Jesus tells, because that's not how Jesus sees the disciples. Jesus never stops hoping in the disciples. Jesus never stops believing the best of the disciples. And so he prays, believing the best of them, believing that the day will come. And it does, where they can set aside their petty arguments, where they can set aside their paltry and self-centered concerns, where they can rise above their factions and divisions and be one, and as one, undertake this mission of making the world that is into the world that ought to be. And Jesus also prays for you. He prays for me. In this prayer, he doesn't just pray for the disciples. He prays very specifically for you, and he prays for me. And that's striking, because your story could be told as a story of disappointment. My story could be told as a story of disappointment. Not so much God's disappointment in you, and not so much God's disappointment in me, but our disappointment in ourselves, right? I mean, somewhere along the line, all of us struggle with being disappointed in ourselves. We know, nobody knows better than we do our own shortcomings and failures. Nobody knows better than we do the ways that we haven't been the person that we want to be, the way that we've fallen short, the ways that we feel like we've let other people down. And so it's not that God's disappointed in us, it's that we're disappointed in ourselves, and sometimes we want to tell our own life story in sort of light of the disappointments we feel in our own lack of accomplishment, in our own letting other people down, and our own not quite being able to be the people that we really want to be. But that's not the story that Jesus tells, because Jesus never loses hope in you either. Never loses hope in me. Jesus never loses faith in you. Jesus never loses faith in me. And so he prays for us as well, that whatever haunts us from our past, that we'd be able to rise above that into the future and put aside anything that would keep us from loving one another, so that we too might one day be one, be completely one, as he prays, and that this would be our glory. That whatever has kept us from loving in the past, we would be able to rise above that, put that aside, and love well in the future. Be one, completely one, one in heart and mind. And so it comes as no surprise then that a mother's love at its best gives us insight into God's love. If hope becomes the vehicle by which we continue to love, no matter what has happened, no matter what a person has done, no matter where we are, hope is what keeps us from devolving into hatred. You know, hope is what keeps us from behaving uncivilly towards each other. And hope is what allows us to continue to love and believe the best of each other instead. And a mother's love does that. Because a good mother, no good mother hates her children. Doesn't matter what a child has or has not done. Doesn't matter where a child has or has not been. A good mother doesn't hate her children. And part of the reason is that she doesn't hate her children is she never gives up hope in her children. She never stops believing in her children. She never stops believing the best of her children, hoping for the best in her children, seeing a bright future for her children, and then hoping make that future a reality. Whatever the past has been, whatever has or hasn't been done, whatever struggles are faced, a mother just hopes the best for their child and helps the child believe that as well. My mother certainly did that for me, and I want to let you know that last year I told a couple Mother's Day stories in a way that really surprised me. Miriam came up to me afterwards and she said, you know, you told those, I was a little disappointed in that sermon, you told those stories before. She might not quite say, but she said, you told those stories before, and I was maybe a little disappointed. But actually, I really love Miriam, and one of the reasons I really love Miriam is she gets the details right. Some of you won't know this because you won't be able to go in the men's room, and I shouldn't give the secret away for some of the other men, but if you go in the men's room today, there are cards in there and pens for any men that might have forgot to get their... So young people, if you didn't get your mom a card yet, just visit the men's room this morning, and you know, you'll be all set. You gotta love Miriam. I mean, it's thinking of those little details like that. I mean, such a beautiful thing. So anyhow, you know, when Miriam criticized me last year, it just really cut me to the quick when she said, you told those stories before. And so this year I said, oh, I'm not going to tell the same stories. And so I don't think, and I asked a number of people, have I told you little Ricky stories before? They said, no, you've never told little Ricky stories. And I've told the little Ricky story at the last two services, and I asked them if I told this before to please stop me, and nobody did. So hopefully you have not heard these stories before. And when I was growing up, my mom used to tell me little Ricky stories. And little Ricky was remarkably like little Robbie. And it always really impressed me. It always really, I never could quite figure out how little Ricky was so like a little Robbie. We had other stories in our house, same ones you probably had. We had the little engine that could. right? Read that as you're growing up. I Think I Can, I Think I Can. Mike Mulligan's Steam Shovel. I don't know if some of you read that. That was one of my favorites. And then one that I don't think was widely read, but there were 5 kids in my family, and when you have a big family, there's always this fair amount of bickering going on. And my parents found this book about alligators called No Fighting and No Biting. Well, it really wasn't about alligators, but it was alligators who, I didn't get the no fighting, no biting piece so much, but I really loved the alligators. That was one of my favorites. But as much as I loved that book, I loved Little Ricky stories even more. And my mom would tend to tell me Little Ricky stories when I was having a hard time in my life, when I was struggling with something, when I was giving up hope in myself, giving up hope in the future, that the future could be different, having a hard time imagining how different the future could be. And one of the stories that I really don't tell, because frankly, even after all these years, it's still embarrassing. You know, you talk about these deeply wounding things you experienced as a kid, and in some ways, just thinking about these things sort of brings that wound back. But in the neighborhood in which I grew up, back in that time, everybody would gather. All the men would come home at a certain time. All the families would have dinner together. There were no recreational leagues or recreational possibilities. Communities just made their own recreation. And so all the men would come out onto the street and play games with the kids, and all the kids would gather, and we just, and one of the games that we would play would be wiffle ball. And wiffle ball is, that little plastic bat and that little plastic ball, and they would, the fathers would pitch and play the bases, and because we were young kids, we were little kids, they would facilitate the game in which we would all succeed. Well, most of us would succeed, because I was sort of always athletically challenged. I mean, and that was hard for me, and so I had a really hard time hitting the ball. And so they actually gave me 4 strikes instead of 3. The only other people they did that for were girls. It was a different day and age, and so it wasn't as patronizing as it might be today. But they gave me 4 strikes instead of 3, and I still had the strikeout record. I struck out 17 times in a row. Now, yeah, I know. Some of you, I saw some eyes. Well, yeah, I mean, it's and you just talk about, and this is Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, where men rise and fall by their athletic ability. I mean, right? So, I was completely humiliated. I felt like there was something terribly wrong with me. And I came home, and that night, well, I heard a Little Ricky story. And as it turns out, Little Ricky struggled with athletics too, which surprised me, and because, my sneaking suspicion was that there was something deeply wrong with me. That I was so different, that there's just something deeply wrong with me. And so to know that there was another little boy who also struggled with sports, well, hey man, that in itself really encouraged me, and my ears perked up. And Little Ricky played kickball. But he wasn't very good at kickball, because he could never really kick the ball. And Little Ricky was always getting out. And in fact, Little Ricky, 17 times in a row, never made it to first base. Wow, 17, well, that's a strange coincidence. I mean, holy cow. But as the story went on, Little Ricky came to realize that although he was different, it was okay to be different. And one day when Little Ricky was out walking, he was walking in the woods, and he saw this beautiful butterfly on a flower, and he saw how pretty it was, and it just made him happy. And he realized it was okay to be different. And Little Ricky's mom, she was really proud of him, that he found the courage to be different. We'll see at the end of that story, a little kid who thinks he's just fundamentally something's wrong with him, no hope for the future, disappointed himself, starting to hate himself because he's lost that hope. Now all of a sudden, mother helps him imagine a different future, a brighter future, to find that hope again, and to love that very thing about himself that he hated. What a gift that is. That's such an important thing for mothers to give to their children. In fact, it's such an important thing for all of us who are adults to give to our children. I heard the other day, and this completely floored me. It absolutely broke my heart, but I fully believe it's true. And the statistic was that 7 out of 10 girls, as they enter into adolescence, will stop doing something they love because of the way it makes them look. So think about that. And adolescent girls, you'll know, and those you remember adolescent, 7 out of 10 girls will stop doing something they absolutely love because of the way they make it, they'll think it. Look, maybe they love reading, but they stop reading because they think if other people are reading, it's going to make them look like, you know, a geek or something like that. Maybe they just love running. As a kid, they used to love to run and move, but now they're afraid as they've gotten a little bit longer that they're not going to be perceived in the way they want to, and so they just stop doing things they love. They lose hope in themselves. They start hate themselves, and what they need is someone to help them imagine what the future looks like when they're able to continue to do the things that they love and be loved accordingly. You may well know that the original Mother's Day, actually the original Mother's Day was signed into a holiday by Woodrow Wilson, but a precursor to Mother's Day was another woman whose name I kept telling myself I was going to remember, but I keep forgetting. Her name was Julia Ward Howe, same woman who wrote the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And in Boston in 1870, she ushered the Mother's Day Proclamation. So this was after the Civil War. A lot of people have lost hope for a country, lost hope for their brothers and sisters. They've become bitter, they've become hateful, they've become all these things, but she doesn't lose hope. And so even after all the bloodshed, even after all the violence, she continues to hope and continues to imagine a brighter future for herself, for women, for all of humanity. And she therefore calls all of us to love one another, to bear not the impress of Caesar, but of God. And remember that we're all brothers and sisters, and to therefore pursue peace. That's the original Mother's Day. And Glen Ellen, many of you read, has a blog by the name of Monastery. A lot of you read that, and I do too, and she has a marvelous way of writing. She says this about the original Mother's Day. She says, Mother's Day was never about waiting to be celebrated. It was about joining in this movement that says, whether we're raising them or not, we're all mothers of this brutiful world. And that's her word for combining brutal and beautiful to capture the spirit of this world. We're all mothers of this beautiful world, sent to nurture life in a million different ways. Let's celebrate Mother's Day in the spirit of that revolutionary universal love that proclaims we are our brothers and sisters and babies' keepers. We are the keepers of not just our own babies, but everybody's babies. We're called to mother the motherless. And she says this is what really gives Mother's Day its truest and deepest meaning. And so that is how God loves us. It's how Jesus shows us God's love, and it's how he calls us to love one another. Not allowing ourselves to follow the trends of our culture and society and time by giving up hope on anyone or anything, and so allowing ourselves to devolve into uncivil, hateful behavior. But continuing to hope, continuing to believe the best of others, that no matter what they've been or said or done in the past, they can be better tomorrow. Maybe it just takes us to believe in them. That we can be better. That we can find a way to forgive if forgiveness is what is needed. That we can continue to believe the best if that's what is needed. That we can continue to behave in a polite and kind and generous fashion. And that together, we and the people we're tempted to hate, together, not divided, not pushed off into corners, together as one, completely one in heart and mind, we can make the world that is into the world that was meant to be. Amen.